Forget everything you think you know about ancient Greece. The Greece you learned about in school, that unified civilization that invented democracy and philosophy before passing the torch to Rome, never existed. There was no ancient country called Greece, no Greek empire, no Greek flag. What we call ancient Greece was actually 1,500 independent city-states scattered across the Mediterranean, from Spain to the Black Sea, each one convinced its way of life was the only correct one. These cities shared a language, though dialects varied so much that a Spartan might struggle to understand an Athenian. They shared gods, though Athens' Athena was nothing like Sparta's Athena. They shared the belief that they were civilized and everyone else was a barbarian. But that's where unity ended. What made this chaos special wasn't harmony, but competition. 1,500 social experiments running simultaneously, each trying to prove the others wrong. Athens developed democracy, while Sparta perfected military oligarchy. Corinth grew rich on trade, while Thebes mastered warfare. They took ideas from each other, from Egyptians, from Phoenicians, from anyone worth copying. And somehow, from this magnificent mess, came ideas that still shape our world 2,500 years later. This is their real story. Look at a topographical map of Greece, and you'll understand everything. 80% of it is mountains. Narrow valleys separated by peaks that take days to cross. More coastline than any other Mediterranean country, with hundreds of natural harbors. This geography created 1,500 independent city-states, each convinced it was the center of the world. Athens had its own currency, with Athena's owl Corinth stamped the Pegasus on its coins. Syracuse in Sicily, Miletus in Asia Minor, Sparta in the Peloponnese. Each minted their own money, raised their own armies, worshipped their own version of the same gods. When Greeks went to war, they didn't fight foreign enemies, but essentially each other. The Peloponnesian War that destroyed classical Greece? That was Athens versus Sparta, with every other city choosing sides. Here's my favorite example. In 490 BCE, at Marathon, the Persian Empire invades with maybe 25,000 troops. Athens sends a desperate plea to Sparta for help. What do you think was Sparta's response? Sorry, we're in the middle of a religious festival. We'll come after the full moon. Athens fights alone. Well, almost alone. The tiny city of Plataea sends 1,000 men. That's it. Out of 1,500 Greek cities, 2 show up to fight the existential threat. But here's the detail that captures the whole absurdity. Leading the Persian invasion force was Hippias, the former tyrant of Athens. An Athenian, guiding foreign invaders to destroy Athens because he wanted his job back. As the Persians landed at Marathon, Hippias had a sneezing fit that knocked out one of his teeth. The tooth fell in the sand and disappeared. "Well," he said, "this land will never be mine. My tooth has claimed the only portion I'll ever hold." That's Greek history in a nutshell. Even their unity moments were actually about division. The word Greek, Greci in Latin, wasn't even what they called themselves. They were Hellenes, but more importantly, they were Athenae, Lacedaemoni, Corinthii, meaning Athenians, Spartans, Corinthians. When the Olympics brought them together every 4 years, athletes didn't compete for Greece. They competed for Athens, for Sparta, for Corinth. The victors didn't receive medals. They got olive wreaths and the right to have statues built in their home cities, paid for by their home cities, to remind everyone that Syracuse beat Megara in wrestling. Even their colonies worked this way. When a city got too crowded or politically tense, they didn't expand their territory. They sent citizens to found a completely new, independent city somewhere else. Syracuse in Sicily was founded by Corinth, but immediately became its own sovereign state. Marseille in France, founded by Greeks from Phocaea. Byzantium, later Constantinople and now Istanbul, founded by Megara. The mountains that divided them also protected them. When Xerxes invaded with the largest army the ancient world had ever seen, Herodotus claims 2.6 million men, though modern estimates say maybe 200,000. He had to funnel through narrow passes. 300 Spartans and about 7,000 other Greeks held him at Thermopylae for 3 days. They used geography to their advantage and turned numbers into a liability. Yet this same geography that saved them also doomed them. They could never unite long enough to become a true power. After defeating Persia, Athens and Sparta immediately turned on each other. After that war destroyed them both, Thebes had its moment. Then Macedonia conquered them all, as Macedonians were unified under one king, while Greeks were still arguing about who should lead. The only thing all Greeks agreed on was that they weren't barbarians. Barbaroi, people who spoke languages that sounded like bar, bar, bar to Greek ears. They shared language, gods, and myths. But politically, a Spartan had more in common with his Persian enemies than with the Athenian democrats 50 miles away. In 594 BCE, Athens was dying from the inside out, not from war or plague, but from debt. Small farmers who had borrowed seed money after a bad harvest found themselves facing extremely high interest rates. Can't pay? You become a slave, along with your children. One bad harvest, and entire families disappeared into bondage, working the very fields they once owned. The rich were getting richer, literally owning their neighbors. The poor were considering revolution. Blood was in the air. Both sides agreed on only one thing. They needed someone to fix this before everyone started killing each other. They chose Solon, a merchant poet with a reputation for wisdom and, crucially, moderate wealth. Rich enough that the aristocrats trusted him, not so rich that the poor hated him. Solon's solution was radical enough that we still have a word for it. The Seisachtheia, literally, the shaking off of burdens. He canceled all debts, all of them. Every loan wiped clean. Every Athenian enslaved for debt immediately freed. The stone markers that showed which lands were mortgaged, pulled from the ground and smashed. The aristocrats were furious. The poor wanted more. Why not redistribute the land entirely? But Solon held firm. He divided citizens into 4 classes based on wealth. And here's the clever part. He gave everyone some political power, but scaled it to what they could contribute. The rich could hold high office, but had to pay for public projects and military equipment. The poor couldn't be archons, but they could vote in the assembly and serve on juries. Think about what that meant. For the first time in human history, a farmer who produced just 200 bushels of grain a year could sit in judgment on an aristocrat. He could vote on whether to go to war. He had a voice, however small, in his own governance. But Solon knew his reforms were fragile. So he made both sides swear a sacred oath to obey his laws for 10 years. Then he left Athens entirely. Went traveling for a decade to prevent anyone from pressuring him to change things. The man restructured society and then literally sailed away to let it work itself out. It didn't quite work. Within a generation, Athens fell under tyranny, though not the kind of tyranny we imagine. Pisistratus, who seized power in 560 BCE, was what Greeks called a tyrant, someone who ruled without traditional authority, but not necessarily cruelly. He actually kept most of Solon's laws, built public works, and supported small farmers. His sons were less competent, and by 510 BCE, the Athenians had expelled the last tyrant with Spartan help. That's when things got really interesting. In 508 BCE, in the power vacuum after tyranny, an aristocrat named Cleisthenes made a proposal that shouldn't have worked. Instead of letting the old tribal aristocracies regain power, why not scramble everything? He reorganized every single Athenian into 10 new tribes. But here's the genius part. Each tribe had to include people from the city, the coast, and the inland farms. You couldn't have a tribe of just urban merchants or just rural farmers. Every political unit was forced to include different economic interests. Your political identity was no longer about which powerful family you were born into, but essentially, which random group you'd been assigned to. Then he introduced the most radical idea yet, the Council of 500, where 50 members from each tribe would serve for 1 year, chosen by lot. A farmer from the hills could find himself setting the agenda for the entire city. A potter might be organizing the defense budget. The aristocrats called it madness. How could random selection produce good government? But Cleisthenes understood something profound. If positions were elected, the wealthy would always win. They had the time to campaign, the money to build influence. But if you chose by lot and paid people to serve, then any citizen could participate. The blacksmith who couldn't afford to take a year off? Now he could serve, because the position came with a salary. This wasn't perfect democracy. Women couldn't participate. Neither could slaves or foreign residents, even if they'd lived in Athens for generations. Of Athens' maybe 250,000 residents, only about 30,000 were male citizens who could vote. That's barely 12%. But for those 30,000, it was revolutionary. They didn't elect representatives to govern for them. They governed directly. Every major decision went to the assembly, where any citizen could speak. Imagine 6,000 farmers, merchants, and aristocrats packed onto a hillside, shouting down bad ideas, cheering good ones, actually deciding whether to build a fleet or declare war or change the laws. They even invented a solution for demagogues. Once a year, the assembly could vote to exile anyone they thought was getting too powerful. Not for committing a crime, just for being too influential. Each citizen would scratch a name on a piece of broken pottery. An ostracon. Get 6,000 votes against you, and you were gone for 10 years. They called it ostracism. And yes, that's where our word comes from. They exiled heroes of Marathon, brilliant generals. Even Cleisthenes himself might have been ostracized. It was messy and chaotic. Thucydides complained that the people changed their minds like weather. But it worked, sort of, for almost 200 years. A radical experiment in trusting ordinary people with extraordinary power, built on the foundation of a debt crisis that nearly destroyed the city. The gamble was this, that a cobbler and an aristocrat, a farmer and a merchant, thrown together by lot and given actual power, would make better decisions than any king or oligarchy. Sometimes they did. Sometimes they voted to execute their own victorious generals or launch doomed invasions. But they owned their mistakes in a way no other ancient people did.